Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cowboy Criminology. My name is Derek Judd, and of course, I am your host, the Cowboy Criminologist. So I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. My wife and I, we were entertaining some friends, had some friends over for dinner, and somewhere in between the entree and dessert, I have no idea what happened, but everything just went crazy. So of course, I'm talking about the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. And immediately, I had people wanting to get a hold of me, wanting to know what I thought about this whole thing. And before I even had a chance to look at my phone, this is like 3 hours had gone by from the time I had originally found out about it to when it happened. By the time I looked at my phone, there was all of these things popping up that it was staged by Trump. It was a plot by the Biden administration. It was corruption in the Secret Service that allowed this whole thing to happen. And the whole thing turned into a tailspin. Okay? So let me preface this entire video by saying this. The motto of this channel is getting to the truth behind true crime. All right. I don't glamorize anything. I do try to be respectful when I'm talking about the victims because I don't want to re-victimize them, their family, their friends all over again. I give enough information to talk about what happened, and then I'll let you make up your mind, your decision on how to apply the information I've given you. Okay. That being said, I am very cautious about adding too much of my personal belief structure, whether that's about my religion or whether that's about my political affiliation, because I don't want to turn people away from learning about criminology just because they disagree with me about whatever political or religious leanings I have. Okay. So this is not going to be a pro-Trump video. This is not going to be an anti-gun video. This is talking about the criminal act that took place. And it gives us a unique opportunity because you don't, at least in America, thankfully, at least in America, you don't deal with assassinations of political leaders or social leaders terribly often. Now, the 60s, had a rash. Of course, you had the Kennedy shot, and you had Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. It was a very tumultuous time in American history. And so what I do want to do is I want to talk about Thomas Matthew Crook in the role of the assassin. Okay. Now, among the different types of serial killers that John Douglas, Robert Ressler, and Roy Hazelwood discovered, they figured that as they branched out from rapists and killers, they determined that they could identify other types of criminals by their behavior, specifically assassins and bombers. And assassins and bombers have a very similar typology. We'll get to all that here in just a little bit, but I wanted to make a preface about that, about what this video was and was not going to be. And y'all, we're going to get to the truth behind true crime, and we're going to talk about the crime the way it was, the way it happened. And we're not going to use Cowboy Criminology as a chance to air grievances. We're not going to use this channel as a political platform. Okay. If you have a dissenting opinion with me, hey, that's great. I welcome dissenting opinions. You're more than welcome to agree with me or disagree with me. When you leave comments, I don't delete comments that are left. Um, I'm not Mark Zuckerberg, so I don't feel that's my place. So if you know, uh, that's kind of the thing. If you're going to put yourself out there as a content creator, you're going to have to accept the fact that people aren't always going to agree with you, uh, and what you say, how you apply your information, and one thing or another. Okay, so I want to start off with kind of giving you, if you haven't figured it out already, I'm sure most of you have already watched it and been looking uh, and been looking out for it. But I want to go back to a video from the Wall Street Journal. And when I'm looking at my news sources, if I can, I like to try and get my sources from local affiliates, because I feel like they do a better job than the nationally syndicated media on just sticking to the facts and telling what happened. So, I was going to include a video from a large news network. Unfortunately, the guest host that they had on kind of went off into a tangent, and it was everything I was trying to avoid. It's everything I'm trying to avoid promoting here on this channel, because I feel like if you focus on these outside influences that are biasing your opinion, you can't really look at what's going on. You can't really get to the truth behind true crime. So this is from the Wall Street Journal. For whatever that's worth, they actually did a really good job on this piece. But so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a video that was put together by the Wall Street Journal to see how everything kind of unfolded and see what kind of information we can get.
Make sure we take back the White House.
2 Secret Service sniper teams could be seen on rooftops behind former President Donald Trump less than 2 minutes before gunfire erupted at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday. They appear to be getting into position facing the direction of the gunman who authorities say fired the shots that grazed former President Trump.
Look at what happened.
Trump said a bullet struck him in the ear. Here's how the attack unfolded. President Trump was speaking from a stage located here. The suspected gunman was on the roof of another building less than 450 feet away from where Trump was speaking, with a clear line of sight. 1 minute and 32 seconds before shots are heard, we can see 2 Secret Service sniper teams moving into place on the roofs behind the former president. One on the south roof and one on the north roof, facing the direction of the shooter. It's unclear if they were repositioning or setting up for the first time.
And then the worst president in the history of our country took over. And look what happened to our country.
Moments before the shooting, we can hear nearby spectators saying they see someone with a gun.
He's going to get him!
While Trump speaks, the Secret Service snipers are still facing the gunman's direction. We then see an agent on the north roof pick his head up just before shots ring out at 6:15. Secret Service agents rush to pull Trump to the ground. As they rush him off the stage, blood can be seen on the bleachers behind where Trump was speaking. A spectator was killed and 2 more were critically injured at the event, the Secret Service said. The suspected gunman, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, was shot and killed, according to the FBI.
Okay, so we're left with not a whole lot of information there. What we see right now is we see kind of a failure of site security, all right? And I'm going to pick on the Secret Service a little bit here, because why in the world would you not have somebody posted up on a building that close to where a former presidential candidate happens to be speaking. That doesn't make any sense. Now, other reports that I've seen have talked about how other officers, municipal, local law enforcement was notified that there was somebody with a gun bear crawling on top of this building. And when the officer tried to get up there, and there's a little discrepancy. I'm trying to figure out how Crooks was able to get up there unassisted when the report I saw said another officer had to be hoisted up there by another officer, and Crooks turns and is getting ready to engage the officer, and the officer drops down, which is completely understandable. I don't think that's an act of cowardice. I think that's self-preservation and physics. You know, he's not in a position to do anybody any good if he gets killed. My issue is not really with the local law enforcement as far as, and there's going to be a lot of finger pointing back and forth. The locals should have done this, Secret Service should have done that. The problem is that the Secret Service has command of this scene. It is their responsibility to ensure the safety of former President Donald Trump while he's campaigning. All right. And the fact of the matter is in this area where this rally was being held, there seemed to be several rooftops that had no law enforcement presence. So my department, one time we were hosting an outdoor event. And I always said that one of the things that we need to do is we need to make sure that all the doors in the surrounding area are locked where nobody can get to the roof. Nobody has roof access. You know, we check the fire escapes. We check any service ladders, things like that. We make sure that people can't just scale the buildings and get up to where they can shoot at us. Worst kept military secret in history is that high ground provides you a tactical advantage on people you're either trying to repel or attack. So it's not it's not any great secret. It's not a state secret, certainly. But a lot of people accused me of being paranoid. Oh, well, it's not going to happen here. You just need to relax. It's not that serious. It's not that big a deal. Well, security is always a big deal. All right. And you really should have somebody posted where they can keep watch on the roofs. Now, the Secret Service snipers were working in teams of 2. Okay. That's not an issue. Now, there seems to be some hesitation on the part of the Secret Service officer's part, because the last thing he wants to do is fire on a friendly. But there seems to be little or no communication or poor communication about what was going on. What should have happened is, as soon as a potential threat had been brought up, everything should have come to a halt. Secret Service should have gotten President Trump off the safe until they could assess the scene and get it secured. But that's not what happened. So lack of communication is the downfall of any emergency response. I don't care what it is. If it's an accident, if it's an assassination, or if it's a mass casualty event, if you can't communicate, nothing else matters. So looking at all this seems like it would have been easily prevented had the Secret Service positioned an officer on top of each building. if they had been made aware, if they had had officers keeping people away from the buildings, not allowing them ingress and egress. So that's kind of the law enforcement side of that. Okay. And with the law enforcement side of that, people are calling for the resignation of the chief of the Secret Service, and they're saying some very unflattering things. I don't necessarily think they're wrong for calling for the chief of the Secret Service to step down, because this was ultimately, it was her responsibility. I disagree with why they're calling for her to step down, that being that she's a woman, and that doesn't have anything to do with it. This was poor planning, and somebody on the ground had tactical command and should have been in a position to look at the manpower and either request more resources or utilize the officers that were on the ground. Okay. So that being said, we can kind of move on. Now, they said that the shooter was 450 feet, roughly 145 yards away from the president. Okay. Some commentators that I saw, they didn't mention the weapon specifically, but they did talk about, based on their knowledge, that the rifle is capable of shooting a 2-inch group at 100 yards. Okay. So shooting a 1-inch group at 100 yards. So at that range, you're looking at just a little over being able to shoot a group of about 1.5 inches for a competent marksman. Okay. That's pretty much industry standard for most of your decent rifles. Should hold 1 minute of angle or 1 inch at 100-yard accuracy. So depending on the weapon, how often he's worked with it, one thing or another, that can tell us a lot that we need to know about him. So I was looking to see, okay, what do we know about crooks that can help us kind of figure, what do we know about crooks that can help us figure out anything about his mental state? Okay. So let's see what we got here.
You saw the president that was, he was talking about immigration and pointing over to the screens. And then the next thing that we knew, we started to hear shots ring out.
It happened so quick, like just 3 shots. There was 20 Secret Service agents running around like chickens with their heads cut off in that field.
We don't yet have any information about the motive of the shooter. We know who he is. I urge everyone, please, don't make assumptions about his motives or his affiliations.
He was always alone. I mean, he was bullied every day. Like, you could look at him and you would be like, something's a little off. That's how I could describe it.
Eyewitnesses describing a chaotic scene that unfolded yesterday when the sudden hail of gunfire rang out at former President Trump's Pennsylvania rally. And now we are learning more about the shooter. Hello and welcome back. I'm John Roberts in Washington. Sandra, there's a lot of questions yet to be answered.
And a lot we're learning at this hour. I'm Sandra Smith in New York, and this is a special edition of America Reports on this Sunday. The FBI is investigating the incident as an assassination attempt. Here's what we know so far. The FBI revealed the 20-year-old shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks, acted alone. He used a gun that was found near the scene, and Fox has learned it was legally purchased by Crooks' father.
Right now, the FBI is sifting through DNA evidence, fingerprints, and any social media presence as it tries to determine the motive.
All right, let's get right to David Spahn. He's live in Washington. He's got the latest on this investigation and what we are learning right now. David?
Well, Sandra, something we've just been able to confirm through the Secret Service. According to a spokesperson for the Secret Service, local authorities were aware of this threat shortly before President Trump was fired upon, shortly before shots rang out at this rally last night. And when the local police tried to make contact. That's when the shooting started. There are still questions, though, as to why the Secret Service was not aware of this threat before it happened. Now, technically, it was outside of the perimeter where this suspect, Thomas Crooks, was.
Okay, so we're going to pause that at 2 minutes and 8 seconds into the video. Outside of the Secret Service perimeter, I mean, it didn't look from the last video we saw like it was a terribly big area. So why not expand that? Why not take a harder look at what you're doing and expand that? And I think a lot of it might come down to a little bit of ego. You know, we're the Secret Service. This is what we do on a daily basis, and you know, we know the best way to do this. We know the best way to handle this. Y'all just step back and let us do it. That could be a possibility, but you also have to realize that on the opposite side of that. The opposite side of that is you only have so much manpower to cover so much space. So you have to balance those two things, and it doesn't appear that balance was achieved. Well, obviously the balance wasn't achieved, because here's what we have. Okay, so we're going to pick it up now.
With his gun. It was with an AR-556.
Okay. News media. If your anchors don't know anything about firearms, either bring somebody on to educate them about firearms, or just let them say that it was a rifle, it was a shotgun, it was a handgun. All right. There is no AR-556. There are AR-15s. There are AR-10s. There are AR-12s, AR-50s. There is not an AR-556. You have AR platforms that shoot a 5.56 NATO round, but you do not. 5.56 is a designation for the round. It's not a designation for the rifle, and that's just embarrassing. Pet peeve.
This is being investigated per FBI officials as potential domestic terrorism. The FBI trying to get access to the suspect's phone. Now, they have his phone physically at the lab, the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. They just are not able to get quite inside yet. As I said, the AR-style 5.56 was located at the scene near Crook's body. An explosive device was found in his car. It's notable, Sandra John, it took a while for authorities to get into the car because they were concerned something may explode.
Okay, so I want to kind of talk about what's going on there. We're going to stop there at 2:44. Going back, you saw me shaking my head when they started describing this as potentially as domestic terrorism. Yo, we're going to get to that here in just a minute, but I'm going to explain why this is not domestic terrorism. This falls under an umbrella. Yeah, I guess you would classify it as domestic terrorism as far as criminal charging purposes, but the motivation for these types of actions, which we'll get into, are not nearly as grand as they'd like us to think. Now, they found explosives, or what they believe to be explosives, in Crook's vehicle, and so it took them a while to enter the vehicle. Absolutely, safety is paramount once the scene is secure. But if you believe that you're dealing with improvised explosive devices, not knowing how they're made, not knowing what's going to set them off, one thing or another, you're going to take an abundance of caution. Now, as far as those being in the vehicles, I think had he been successful and had he been able to get back to his vehicle, those explosives would have been used to aid in his escape, or possibly that could have been his end game, looking for a second opportunity to end his life. Okay. To be fair, you don't want to do when you're doing an analysis like this, there's a little speculation involved, but you want to keep your speculation condensed to the facts and to playing the numbers and looking at types of offenders like this that have come before and figuring out what they have in common. Okay. So we'll pick it up here at 244.
Those devices and materials have been taken to Quantico as well. Now, he was not known to law enforcement before. The FBI has since received more than 2,000 tips from yesterday. Now, Crooks was taken out almost immediately by a Secret Service sniper on the roof after shots were fired at former President Trump. The FBI spent the majority of the day at his home in Bethel Park, just south of Pittsburgh. Fox News spoke to a former classmate of Crooks who says that he was on the local rifle team. Listen.
Okay, pause that at 316. He was on the local rifle team. Okay, so that answered a huge question for me because I already knew as soon as they called him an assassin or he started saying that this was an assassination, my mind went to different assassins that I had studied in the past. And I was like, okay, we've got an inadequate type. I bet you he's a loner. Bet you still lives with mom and dad. I bet you he was very introverted. He didn't have a whole lot of friends, probably bullied in high school. And one thing I couldn't wrap my mind around was, okay, where did the gun come from? Okay, legally purchased firearm from the dad. You have a young man here, he's an adult who can legally go out and buy a firearm, can legally transport a firearm to and from the range, use it for hunting, what have you. So there's no issue here. All right. And from reports that we've seen coming in, he's no history of mental health issues. He's never demonstrated any type of violence towards anybody. Combing social media, there's not really a whole lot there. Anything that would indicate that he's planning something like this, which is very important. All right, but let's hear here at the 316 what his classmates have to say.
I didn't have any interaction with him, but he was like a kid that was always alone. He was always bullied every day. He was just an outcast.
In addition to the 2,000 tips, the FBI wants more. FBI Director Christopher Wray said this is despicable what had happened. Any information, cell phone video, whatever you have, call the FBI, 1-800-CALL-FBI. But a lot of questions about this AP report that we talked about in the last hour, John and Sandra, of a local police officer potentially climbing up a ladder, made contact with Crooks, then allegedly retreated, and that's when Crooks apparently opened fire.
Okay, stop that at 359. So apparently there was a ladder that allowed the shooter to get up, and the law enforcement officer attempted to get up there as well. But why was that ladder well not secured? That doesn't make any sense. It's too close to a very polarizing figure for you to leave that to chance. That just doesn't jive. So once again, I think the Secret Service dropped the ball on this one.
Locals did engage, and once they started to engage, that's when the firing took place.
And what is remarkable is that the Secret Service is part of this briefing that we're watching happening right now. They're leading it, and they will not take questions on the attempted assassination. We've dipped into this and listened to this multiple times, and they are only talking about security for the convention. They are not answering questions. David Spunt, thank you very much. We'll check back in soon. John?
Hey, Sean Hannity
Stop that
here.
at 4:30. Okay. Yeah, they're not going to answer questions because, first off, they've got people coming in from Washington, D.C. There are a lot of people who are going to lose their jobs over this one. There really are. And what they are gearing up for is to make sure that when they go to the Republican National Committee or Convention, where former President Trump is expected to, of course, carry the Republican nomination for president, for the election in November, they can't afford any more missteps. All right. So we'll end the video at 4:30. Okay. So we did. I'll tell you what we didn't do. We didn't get a whole lot of information that really allows us to dig down into the bedrock and establish his motive. Okay. That could have come from being radicalized from listening to the news. It could have been from listening to some pirate radio, something like that. Why did he fixate on Trump? Well, the sad truth about an assassin type like Crooks is that if it hadn't been Trump, it would have been somebody else. It just would have been. You have somebody who was bullied every day, got no attention from anybody except bullies. And as a result of that, my best guess would be he turned into an injustice collector. And you have somebody now who's determined to change the way that people see him. I think a lot of people are making too much of his previous and current political affiliations. I think people are trying to make this more complicated than it is. And my proof for this, my backup for this, comes from looking at other types of other people who have committed assassinations in the past. And so one of the first individuals I want to bring up is James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray was a born criminal, came from a criminal family. And of course, he's the individual responsible for the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Birmingham, Alabama. What happened with Earl is he became politicized or radicalized by listening to George Wallace, or Governor George Wallace, who is a presidential candidate, talking over and over and over again about how we needed to keep schools segregated, one thing or another, purity of the white race, all this nonsense. And in doing that, James Earl Ray kind of gave himself a purpose, and wow, if I pull this off, aren't I going to be the hero? It didn't work out that way. All right. And then you have Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, we're talking about conspiracy theories and, trying to keep things from spiraling out of control. And y'all, there's no way to talk about the JFK assassination without bringing up conspiracy theories. All right. So to try to condense that a little bit, there are so many things about Lee Harvey Oswald as far as, he was a communist sympathizer. He believed that JFK was trying to ruin the country, one thing or another. But in the cases that haunt us by John Douglas and Mark Olshaker, John Douglas breaks down the evidence, and he had access to all of that when he told the Secret Service that they were going to try and work on profiling assassins after, in 1981, when John Hinckley Jr. attempted to woo actress Jodie Foster by killing Ronald Reagan. That didn't work out, and John Hinckley Jr. is out and about trying to kickstart his music career. I disagree with him being out, but anyway, going back to Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was the paranoid, introverted type and just enough of a nobody, I guess you could say, that he thought he was going to be somebody. And because of he had big man syndrome or little man syndrome. He wanted to be a big man, and he wanted to talk about all these things he could do and one thing or another. And John Douglas pretty much sums it up very succinctly. And he says, somebody like Oswald is the last person you'd want to include into a conspiracy. Not to mention, if he is part of a conspiracy and the United States government is attached to that conspiracy, you are going to have people being killed in just this continuous loop until people are put into a position of power where they're untouchable. I don't know if I don't know if I believe in that portion of the conspiracy theory, but give the devil his due. Every once in a while, you will hear a conspiracy theory that somebody lays out for you, and you're kind of like, ooh, okay, yeah. Okay, there might be something to that. But be that as it may, it's easier for me now after reading what John Douglas found to kind of put a lot of that stuff to bed. And then you have Sirhan Sirhan. Of course, he killed Robert F. Kennedy because Sirhan Sirhan believed that, that the Kennedy was going to continue to oppress the Middle East and the Eastern world, and he had to act, and he thought he was going to be a hero, and even his own country disavowed him. So, was Sirhan Sirhan necessarily the inadequate type? Yeah, because he had these delusions. He was not somebody who was really well known, or wasn't known at all until he killed Robert Kennedy, and then he never made any impact, and a lot of people who were associated with him completely disavowed him. So then we're going to move forward to Joe Paul Franklin. Joe Paul Franklin, he was I think the original LDSK, long distance serial killer, and he would go around the country and he would shoot at specifically blacks and black males when they were in the company of white women. He had this whole deranged racist ideology, and he's actually the one who put Hustler founder Larry Flint in a wheelchair after a pictorial showed a white woman engaging in sex with a black man. Joe Paul Franklin completely lost it. Now, to give you a little insight into Joe Paul Franklin's psyche, Joe Paul Franklin isn't his actual name. He took Joe and Paul from Joseph Goebbels and I can't remember the Paul, but high-ranking Nazi leaders that he idolized and respected. So if that doesn't tell you a little bit about him, I don't know what. Why he chose the surname Franklin, it's anybody's guess. But if that doesn't give you an idea of what an inadequate type is like, that's it. So then we go to David Berkowitz, son of Sam. Now, he's the second serial killer that I'm going to mention, and I'm only mentioning him because if you know anything about David Berkowitz, you can make a lot of parallels to a lot of different assassin types. They kill from a distance, and they kill because if I'm a nobody, or I can't have this, then nobody should be able to have this. And Berkowitz totally got off on keeping New York City under his thumb for almost an entire year. And he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the attention. He enjoyed inflicting the fear, because for a little bit of time, he was somebody. Now, I think if he hadn't been caught, he probably would have done something to get himself caught, because yeah, it's cool to be known as the Son of Sam, but nobody knows who the Son of Sam is. Nobody can see who I am and what I've done. And you talk about anticlimactic endings. When his mug was shown on TV, I mean, you talk about anticlimactic, everybody's like, that's the guy. It's like, man, he looks like the type of guy who kids would steal his lunch money. He's a grown man, so, but afraid to confront somebody head on, afraid to be confronted with a bigger threat like a woman in the company of a male, and wanted to take out beautiful women with his Charter Arms Bulldog 44, specifically because he wasn't in a relationship. He was neglected by, or he was rejected by his biological mother and sister. They didn't want anything to do with him. Never felt like he had a place in the world. So he decided to carve out a place for himself. Next one we're going to talk about is, we'll skip to John Hinckley right quick. John Hinckley Jr., of course, he tried to woo Jodie Foster, and John Hinckley is probably the best definition of an obsessive compulsive personality for an assassin. He documented the miles he traveled. He documented everything about his life. And if you ever get the chance to read any of the declassified documents about John Hinckley Jr., I suggest you do so, because it's really kind of a fountain of information. And if you could do a case study on John Hinckley Jr., you could pretty much figure out any assassin type. But he was sentenced to be committed to a mental health institution instead of prison until such time passed that he was no longer deemed to be a threat to society. And of course, that came just within the last few years. I don't think he ever should have gotten out. That's just my personal opinion. Nobody asked me, but there it is. The last one we're going to talk about is Mark David Chapman. Now, Mark David Chapman, you talk about inadequate. Mark David Chapman idolized John Lennon. Copied his clothes, copied his hair. He tried to write songs, tried to learn to play an instrument, even went so far to copy John Lennon's life that he began dating, almost exclusively started dating Asian women, because John Lennon was married to Yoko Ono at the time. And Mark David Chapman just became so obsessed. And when I was researching assassin profiles, making sure I kind of had all my ducks in a row, it was interesting to note that there's a famous picture, the last picture of John Lennon alive, is you see him signing an autograph for Mark David Chapman, who's standing right behind him. And I have a theory about this. Now, I'm going to say this, and you're going to go, no kidding. So it's not really a theory, but just hear me out. If Mark David Chapman had never met John Lennon, he'd still be alive. I know it sounds weird. But Mark David Chapman also would have ended up in jail because he was going to kill somebody, okay? if he couldn't be John Lennon, he would have turned his attention to somebody else. But John Lennon, he deemed accessible one thing or another. And had he not been able to make contact, I don't think we would have ever heard of Mark David Chapman, because I don't think he would have fixated on another celebrity as high profile as John Lennon. The other part of that theory is that as soon as John Lennon gave Mark David Chapman an autograph, Mark David Chapman took the autograph and walked away. But I imagine when he looked at that, that was the realization that he was never going to be John Lennon. He was always going to be Mark David Chapman. And I think in that moment, once he realized that, he made the decision to come back and kill John Lennon, because now the only way for people to know who he is to permanently associate himself in some way with his idol. It's a very cowardly way to look at it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cases that tend to kind of back up that version of events. But Thomas Matthew Crooks seems to fall well in line with what I would expect to see from the assassin type profile developed by the FBI. So with that being said, if you're looking for the political angle, if you're looking for some motive, you don't need to put in too much legwork to it, okay? Really, all you need to know about the assassin type personality is that they are so inadequate, they will do anything to elevate their status and make people see them as somebody to be respected or feared. Now, he had to know that the odds of him succeeding were slim, but he got real close. I mean, 5 millimeters. So I'm trying to remember, 5 millimeters to the left, and he probably would have killed former President Trump. But he kept shooting, and maybe it was his version of suicide by cop, going up against the Secret Service. And after he realized he missed President Trump, you could hear the delay between shots, and then he just decides, well, I'm just going to take as many people with me as I can. And unfortunately, he killed somebody completely innocent, somebody who was there to support their candidate. And what a horrible thing that is for those people, and that makes me nervous about people who are going to politicize this on both sides, Republican and Democrat, and turn this into something that it's not. Y'all, I'm going to go ahead and say it straight from the horse's mouth. Regardless of whatever they find in Crook's possessions, there is absolutely nothing, and I do mean nothing, that is going to explain his motives, because that's all hidden in his personality. And I think, based on what we're finding out from his former classmates, he was just lonely, didn't feel good about himself, and decided he was going to make a big splash. As far as anything that comes up, remember how in past videos I've talked about rationalization, neutralization, and justification? That's all that's going to be. That's all it's going to be. Because in order for him to do this and get himself in the place where he fantasizes about it, scouts out how he's going to do it, one thing or another, he had to have he had to be able to justify, I have to do this because something. All right. And this is one of those cases where, you know, the fact is you have somebody with little man syndrome, wants to be a big man, and is going to do something where people no longer see him as a loser, as an outcast. They're going to respect me. They're going to fear me. They're going to make me a martyr. But let's say he had gotten away. I talked a little earlier about how I thought he might use explosive devices in order to keep people away, in order to ensure his escape. You know, throw pipe bombs out the car window while he's driving or what have you. But he had to know. He had to know, regardless of whether he made it away from the rally or not, the odds of him being taken alive was based solely 100% on him giving up. But the problem with that is if he gives up, it's a sign of weakness. And if you're trying to build yourself up, last thing you're going to do is show weakness. So you've got kind of conflicting information there. And as always, when I'm doing my analysis, y'all, just remember, you got to take it for what you know at the time, add what you know from your past cases that are relevant, and move forward. And as you get new information, you got to feed that in and see how it changes. Okay. But I don't think we're going to come up with a whole lot of surprises. All right. If people try to bring political or social issues into it, they're muddying the water, and don't fall into that trap. Stay focused on the behavior. The behavior is what's not going to change. Any motive they find for him, that's rationalization, neutralization, justification. But I would say that his compartmentalization, coming from years of being an introvert and years of being bullied, keeping things internalized, he probably fantasized about this a lot. So the one piece that I'm still missing to really put my stamp on this and say, you know, this is what I know, this is what I believe happened, and this is why I think it happened, is I want to know how many times he went to that rally point. I'm curious if anybody saw him walking around, if anybody saw him looking at the ladder, looking at the building. Maybe there's some surveillance cameras from far off, and maybe he's got a pair of binoculars or used his phone to zoom in on that roof to see where the Secret Service was, see where any sniper teams were, and to see if he could get up there. Being a part of the rifle club or being on local shooting teams, he would have been able to use an AR platform rifle very effectively. So, I mean, that kind of takes care of that. So outside of all that, I mean, unless he's an outlier and new information comes forward that just completely blows this case open, I think we've got a pretty good starting point from him for Crooks. Everything else up to this point is largely going to be details that aren't really going to make a difference about who he is. And who he is was a lonely guy who wanted to make a name for himself, wanted to become a martyr for whatever cause he thought he was supporting by taking out former President Trump. And he ended up dying in a shootout with police, like most criminals who pull a gun on police. So, or like what happens when you attempt to fire a gun when police are around. This kind of stuff tends to happen. So, Y'all, the political and social angles of this case, they're hard to overlook. What I'm asking you to do is go beyond that, look past them, and really kind of get an idea for yourself on what type of people commit these types of crimes. And if you have any doubts, read up on some of these other assassin type profiles that I've told you about, and take a look at them, and you will see that they all very closely mimic each other. And while some of the motivations and everything change, who they are at their core, their personality, their behavior, that doesn't really change. So anyway, I'm Derek Judd, the Cowboy Criminologist for Cowboy Criminology. Y'all, I hope this kind of helps put the attempted assassination of former President Trump into perspective for you. And as always, please like and share on your favorite social media platforms. And as always, I love to hear from y'all in the comments. So y'all take care, be safe, and keep the people in Pennsylvania that have been affected by this, keep them in your thoughts and prayers. All right, y'all take care. Talk to you next time.